The old music room stood alone at the end of the silent street, its windows covered in dust, its door creaking like a whisper whenever the wind passed through. No one had entered it for years. The townspeople said strange things about it. Some said they could still hear faint piano notes echoing from inside at midnight. Others said it was cursed after the great fire that had destroyed half the conservatory. But for Elena, a thin young girl with messy hair and tired eyes, the stories didn't matter. She only cared about one thing, the piano her mother once loved. Elena walked slowly through the cold night, her coat too big for her small frame. In her hand, she carried a small metal box filled with tools, screwdrivers, pliers, and some old wires. She had found them in her mother's workshop weeks ago and carried them like treasure. The moonlight guided her steps as she reached the large wooden door of the music room. It groaned when she pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty building like a long sigh. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. Broken chairs, torn music sheets, and old violins lay scattered on the floor. The ceiling had cracks that looked like frozen lightning. But what caught Elena's eyes was the piano standing at the center. Half buried under debris, its surface was dark and cracked, the once shiny keys now gray and dull. She walked toward it as if walking toward a grave. Her mother used to play that piano every evening when Elena was a little girl. The sound would fill their small apartment, soft and warm. Her mother believed music could heal broken hearts. But after the fire, everything changed. Her mother stopped playing, then fell sick, and not long after, she was gone. Elena was left with silence, a silence that hurt more than anything. Now she stood before that same piano. Her heart beating fast, she touched one of the keys gently. It didn't move, it was stuck with ash and rust. She pressed harder, and it made a faint, broken sound like a whisper. That sound made tears rise in her eyes. She smiled sadly, whispering, "I'll fix you." Mom would want that. She sat on the cold floor and opened her toolbox, pulling out a small wrench and a wire. The moonlight fell through the broken roof, lighting her face as she worked. Each turn of the wrench, each movement of her hand was slow but full of purpose. It was as if her hands remembered her mother's lessons, not on the piano keys, but on patience. Her fingers trembled, not from fear but from hope. Outside, the wind carried the soft sound of night insects. The city slept quietly, not knowing that something beautiful was happening in one forgotten corner. Elena hummed a melody her mother once sang to her. Her voice was small but filled the empty hall. Dust floated in the air like tiny stars, and she felt for the first time in years that she was not alone. She looked around and imagined what the room must have been like long ago. Students laughing, music echoing, teachers clapping, her mother in her favorite blue dress, playing this very piano while sunlight streamed through the windows. That picture in her mind gave Elena strength. She began clearing the debris around the piano, pushing away broken wood and torn books. Her hands were covered in dirt, but she didn't stop. When she finally sat down before the piano, the bench wobbled under her weight. She laughed quietly, the sound strange after so much silence. Her reflection stared back at her in a piece of broken mirror hanging nearby. She hardly recognized herself, older, thinner, but determined. She ran her fingers over the blackened keys, whispering, "Don't worry, I'll make you sing again." A single candle flickered beside her, casting long shadows on the wall. It made the room look alive again, like the ghosts of music past were watching her for a moment. She thought she heard faint laughter, a memory, not a sound, maybe her mother's. She closed her eyes and let the warmth of that thought fill her chest. As the night deepened, the clock in the distance struck 12. The sound echoed softly, reminding her that it was truly midnight. She looked up at the broken ceiling and smiled. "It's the right time," she whispered. Then, with slow hands, she began to work again. The city slept on, unaware that a girl was bringing music back to life inside the abandoned music room. The wind outside changed direction. As if listening, the candle flickered once, twice, and stayed steady. And under that faint golden glow, Elena tightened one last screw and pressed a single key again. The note came out weak, cracked, but real. It was the first sound the old piano had made in 10 years, and it was enough to make her believe again. Elena walked home that night with dust still clinging to her hands, but her heart was restless. She couldn't sleep. No matter how tightly she pulled the blanket around her, the room felt too quiet, too cold, like the silence had weight. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the piano's broken keys, the moonlight falling over them like a whisper from the past. For months she had wandered the city after dark, fixing things no one cared about, broken benches, flickering street lamps, old radios left outside the repair shop. It gave her peace, maybe because fixing things made her feel less broken inside. Her neighbors thought she was strange, a quiet girl with tired eyes who never smiled. But they didn't know what she carried inside her, a hole shaped like her mother's laughter. When her mother was alive, their tiny apartment was always filled with music. Even when there wasn't enough food, there was always a song. Her mother believed that melodies could feed the soul. Music never dies, she used to say. It only waits to be heard again. But the night of the fire changed everything. The flames took her mother's hands, her piano, and her smile. After that, Elena stopped listening to music altogether. It felt like betrayal to hear a tune when her mother couldn't play anymore. But on this night, standing in the half-ruined music room, something had changed. She could still feel her mother's warmth there, hidden beneath the ashes, so she decided she would bring the piano back to life. No matter what it took, the next day, while the city rushed through its busy morning, Elena searched junkyards and old shops for parts. She traded small repairs for broken strings, rusty pedals, and whatever she could use. The shopkeepers looked at her like she was crazy. "That thing's beyond saving," one man told her, handing her a half-bent hammer. She only smiled and said softly, "So was I." At sunset, she returned to the old conservatory. This time she carried a lantern, a small bag of tools, and a determination that burned brighter than fear. When she pushed the door open again, it didn't creak. It welcomed her. The dust in the air swirled like golden mist in the lamplight. She placed her lantern on the piano, unrolled a piece of old cloth, and began working. Every click of the wrench echoed softly through the hall. She worked like she was in a trance, her hands steady, her eyes sharp. Sometimes she hummed, barely realizing it. The sound of her own voice comforted her, reminding her that she was still alive, still capable of bringing something beautiful back into the world. The clock struck 11 when she finally leaned back to rest. Her fingers were sore, a few cuts bleeding slightly. But she didn't stop. She could almost imagine her mother standing behind her, smiling proudly, whispering how proud she was. It made Elena's heart ache, but it also gave her strength. Suddenly, a sound broke through the quiet, a cat's soft cry. She turned and saw a small stray sitting near the door, staring at her with curious eyes. She smiled at it, whispering, "You like music too?" The cat blinked and curled up beside her bag. Staying close, somehow it felt like company, as if the universe didn't want her to be alone tonight. As midnight approached, the air grew colder. Her breath came out in faint white clouds, but her hands kept moving. She replaced broken hammers, tightened loose screws, and cleaned each dusty string carefully. She didn't have all the parts she needed, but she improvised, used wire from her lantern handle and a screw from her old bracelet. Finally, she sat back and looked at the piano. It was still cracked and worn, but different now, less dead, more alive. She ran her fingers across the keys, whispering, "You remember me, don't you?" Then she pressed one key gently. The note that came out was faint, shaky, but it was real. A smile broke across her face, small but full of light. The cat lifted its head as if listening. Elena played another note, then another. The sound was uneven, broken in places, but to her, it was perfect. Tears slid down her cheeks. She whispered, "Mom, I did it!" Her voice trembled, but in that moment, the silence of years cracked open. She stayed there for hours, touching the piano like it was alive, whispering promises into the night. Outside, the city lights flickered, but inside that old hall, something stronger flickered awake. For the first time in years, the piano had spoken, and the girl who couldn't sleep finally smiled. Knowing that her mother's music wasn't gone, it was waiting for her to finish the song they both began. When Elena returned to the music room the next night, the moon hung low and pale, almost as if it was watching her. The streets were empty, wet from a light rain. Her shoes splashed quietly through puddles as she carried a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside it were things she'd gathered all day, old strings, a small oil can, and a torn sheet of her mother's last written music. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but from something new, hope. Fragile but alive, when she stepped inside, the air greeted her like an old friend. Dust floated in slow spirals, glowing softly under the lantern she lit. The piano stood in the center, waiting, silent but not forgotten. She brushed her hand across the keys again. each one feeling less like metal and more like skin. "I'm back," she whispered with a small smile. She set the lantern on the side and unwrapped her tools. The cat from the previous night appeared again. Slinking through the broken door, it meowed softly and settled near her feet, watching her work. "You again?" she said with a grin. "Guess you're my assistant now." The broken piano looked worse in the light than she remembered. The lid was cracked, the inside filled with ash and spider webs. But to her it was beautiful, because every broken thing carried a story, and she had promised herself that this piano's story wasn't going to end in silence. Elena began by removing the old strings. Her fingers working carefully, each pull made a faint metallic sigh, as if the piano was breathing again. She cleaned the inside with a rag, wiping away soot and memories of fire. Then she oiled the tiny pins, making sure they could turn again. It was slow work, but she didn't rush. Time didn't matter here, only the sound that would one day return. Her mind wandered as she worked, remembering the nights her mother practiced at home. The walls of their apartment used to glow with sound. The neighbors would complain about the noise, but secretly they loved it. Sometimes children from nearby would sit outside their window, listening. Elena used to fall asleep on the couch while her mother played soft, dreamy songs. That memory felt warm now, like a small candle in her heart. Hours passed, but she didn't stop. Her hair stuck to her forehead. Her nails black with dust, she hummed while working, an unfinished tune her mother once composed. It felt like her mother's hands were guiding hers. Every motion steady, precise, gentle. Suddenly, she heard footsteps slow and hesitant. Elena froze, listening. A shadow moved near the doorway. She turned sharply, holding her wrench like a weapon. Then a soft voice said, "Hey, what are you doing in here?" It was an old night guard holding a flashlight. His eyes widened when he saw her sitting beside the piano. "You shouldn't be here, girl," he said. "This place is closed." "Dangerous?" Elena lowered her tool and smiled faintly. "I'm just fixing something," she replied. The man looked around at the wrecked room. "Fixing?" "Everything here's dead." She looked at the piano, her fingers resting on the keys. "Not everything," she said softly. She pressed a single key and the faint, uneven note echoed through the room. The guard paused, his face softening. "You fixed that?" he whispered. She nodded. "Not yet, but soon." The man sighed, then chuckled. "You remind me of my wife," he said. "She used to fix old watches, said everything ticked again if you loved it enough." He looked at her, then at the piano and smiled sadly. "All right." "I didn't see anything," he muttered before walking away. The door creaked shut behind him, leaving Elena alone again, but now she didn't feel alone. Someone had heard the piano, even if only for a second. She exhaled and continued working, tightening strings, adjusting hammers. The cat purred softly beside her. The lantern flame flickered, throwing golden light across the keys. At last she sat back and took a deep breath. Her arms ached, her fingers trembled, but her heart felt light. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded sheet of music. It was old and half-burned, the notes smudged but still readable. "Lullaby for tomorrow," it said in her mother's handwriting. She placed it on the stand and smiled. "Let's see if you remember this," she whispered to the piano. When she pressed the first few notes, they sounded broken but real. The sound filled the empty hall like a ghost learning to breathe again. The melody was rough, uneven, but it grew stronger with each key. It wasn't perfect, yet it carried something powerful: love, grief, and a promise. Elena played slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds drifted apart, and moonlight poured through the cracks in the roof, shining down on her like a blessing. She could almost see her mother's reflection in the piano's black surface. Smiling, proud, as the last note faded, she whispered, "I'll finish it, Mom, I swear." The piano answered with a faint hum. Like it agreed, the cat stretched, the lantern flickered, and the city beyond the walls held its breath. Because something long dead had just started to sing again. That night, Elena didn't just fix the piano, she woke something up inside her that she thought had died. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a lost girl walking through shadows. She felt like someone with a mission, someone whose hands could bring music back into a broken world. The next evening, the sky turned orange as the sun dipped behind the buildings. Elena stood on her apartment rooftop holding a strange bundle. It was a folded bedsheet with soft padding inside, something she had stitched together herself during the day. A cushion for the piano bench, Her mother had always said that playing music should feel like sitting on a cloud. As she made her way back to the old music room, people passed her without looking. They saw only a girl with messy hair, carrying something strange, but Elena didn't care. Her heart was full of a quiet fire, and her steps were faster than usual. The cat, now her regular shadow, followed her through the streets like a silent companion. She reached the conservatory just as the streetlights flickered on. The building looked the same from outside, dark, cracked, forgotten, but to Elena it felt like a living thing now, waiting for her. When she stepped inside, the air welcomed her like a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She placed the padded cushion on the wooden bench, then stood back and admired her work. The piano, though still scarred, no longer looked like a corpse. It looked like it was resting, ready to speak again. Elena reached out and ran her fingers over the keys slowly, each note soft but stronger than the last time tonight. She didn't want to just fix parts. She wanted to test the melody. Her mother's half-written song was still taped to the stand. "Lullaby for Tomorrow." Elena whispered the name again. It sounded like a promise. She began with the intro, hands trembling. The first few notes were quiet, shaky, but carried a gentle rhythm. She closed her eyes and let the music guide her. The notes were scattered in places. Some had been smudged, others unfinished. But Elena remembered how her mother used to hum the tune while cooking or brushing her hair. She followed that memory more than the notes on paper, letting her fingers find their way through feeling instead of logic. As she played, the sound grew deeper, fuller. It wasn't just a lullaby, it was a message, a memory wrapped in harmony. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the broken windows, scattering some old sheet music across the room. Elena paused and looked up, startled. The lantern flame flickered wildly. She felt a chill run down her spine, not from fear but from something else, presence. Like she wasn't alone. And then something unexpected happened. The old ceiling lights, dead for over a decade, blinked once, then twice, then softly glowed. Elena gasped, staring up. She didn't know how or why, but the conservatory was responding, as if the music had reawakened something in the wires. In the walls, the piano's notes echoed louder now, bouncing off the stone walls, reaching corners untouched in years. Outside, on the street below, a man walking his dog paused. He looked up toward the cracked windows, hearing the faint sound of music drifting out in a nearby building. A nurse finishing her shift leaned out the window, her eyebrows rising. "Is that a piano?" she whispered. Down the block, a teenager on a bike stopped and tilted his head, squinting at the glow coming from the abandoned hall. But Elena didn't see them. She was lost in the music, the keys under her fingers turning into wings. She played with closed eyes, letting the melody rise and fall like waves. When the final note faded into silence, she sat still, hands frozen in midair. The room was glowing gently now, a soft gold hue from the ancient lights above. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her heart racing like a drum. She looked at the cat, who was now sitting up. Ears perked. "Did you hear it?" she whispered. It worked. She stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the street below. For a second, she saw people, just a few, looking up. Confused, curious. Some had their phones out. Others were simply staring, drawn by something they didn't understand. Elena stepped back from the window and looked at the piano again. It looked proud, even in its cracked skin, like a soldier who had returned from war. She smiled and said aloud, "Tomorrow, we play again." And that night, as the city slept, people spoke in hushed tones about the strange music that came from the old conservatory. They didn't know who played it, or how the lights had turned on after all these years. But Elena knew, and the piano knew, and the city slowly, quietly, was beginning to remember the sound of dreams. The next night, Elena didn't walk to the music room, she ran. The city streets blurred around her as she clutched a wrapped bundle against her chest. Inside it was a small speaker, some batteries, and a tiny recorder. Things she had pulled apart and rebuilt from an old toy radio and a broken phone. She had one goal tonight: to record the lullaby, to make it real, to let it live beyond the room. The conservatory was different now. It didn't feel haunted or cold, it felt awake, as if every brick was humming softly, waiting for her return. When she pushed open the door, the hinges barely groaned, like even the metal had grown used to her touch. The cat greeted her with a soft meow and leapt onto the piano bench, tail curled neatly around its paws. Elena laughed quietly and said, "Don't worry, I'll do the playing." She set the recorder on the piano and checked the small light. It blinked red, waiting to capture the melody. Her fingers hovered above the keys, nerves trembling under her skin. This time, she wanted to play the full piece, not just broken notes. She wanted the lullaby to sound like her mother had once imagined it, soft but strong, full of sorrow and light. She closed her eyes and began. The first notes were gentle, like falling snow. Then came the slow climb, the part her mother always called the climb through shadow. It told the story of losing something dear, of a child walking through a world that no longer sang. Elena's hands moved with quiet power, not rushed, not afraid. The music drifted beyond the broken windows again. But tonight the wind was softer. Carrying the sound further, it floated down the street, past sleeping buildings, over the rooftops, and into ears that didn't know they had been waiting for it. An elderly man walking his dog stopped mid-step. The dog sat without command, ears alert. The man looked up at the old conservatory and whispered, "I know that song," even though he didn't across the neighborhood. A little girl stirred in her sleep, then smiled. A taxi driver paused at a red light, turned off his radio and listened. The sound wrapped itself around people's hearts like a memory from a dream they couldn't quite name. Inside the hall, Elena reached the final verse, the part her mother had never finished writing. For a second, her hands hovered, uncertain, but then she let her heart decide. She played a melody of forgiveness, of healing, of letting go. It was not perfect, but it was real. And when she played the final note, it rang like a bell through the empty space, long and clear. She opened her eyes, breath shaking. The cat purred softly beside her. The recorder's light blinked green, the melody safely captured inside. But before she could relax, she heard something, applause real slow, stunned applause from the back of the room. Elena turned quickly, heart jumping. A woman stood in the shadows near the door, wrapped in a coat, eyes wide with wonder. "I followed the music," the woman said. "I was just passing by, but I had to come in." Elena didn't know what to say. The woman stepped closer. "That song, I don't know what it was, but it felt like home." Elena's throat tightened. She managed a small nod and whispered, "It was my mother's." She never got to finish it. The woman's expression softened. "Well, she did now," she said gently. "Through you." More footsteps echoed outside. A small group was gathering near the entrance, drawn by curiosity and that final lingering note. Some whispered, others held their phones up, filming the cracked building that had started singing again. Elena felt her cheeks grow warm. She didn't play for attention, but somehow, she had touched them. People who didn't even know her name. She stepped away from the piano and picked up the recorder, holding it tight, one melody, one night. And yet it had woken something in the city. She looked at the growing crowd and smiled shyly. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "There's more music still sleeping." And without saying another word, she packed up her tools and walked past the crowd, the cat trotting beside her. Behind her, people continued to stare at the conservatory, the place they had forgotten, now glowing faintly from within that night. Social media lit up with shaky videos and half-heard audio clips. People asked, who played the midnight piano? No one knew her name, not yet, but they would. Because Elena had no plans to stop, the lullaby was only the beginning, and the city had only just started to remember how to listen. The next day, the city woke up buzzing with whispers. People who had heard the strange midnight melody spoke in soft voices, sharing videos, audio clips, and blurry photos of the old conservatory glowing faintly in the dark. Some called it a ghost performance, others said it was an urban legend being born. But one thing was clear. Something had come alive in the heart of that broken building. Elena didn't read the posts. She didn't need to. She already felt it like a current in the air. Like the city itself had started to breathe again that evening. She carried with her something special. A faded, framed photo of her mother in the picture. Her mother sat at that same piano, years before the fire, smiling softly with sunlight streaming in from the tall windows. Elena had almost forgotten that smile, until the music helped her remember. When she reached the conservatory, she was surprised to see people already gathered outside. Not many, just a handful, but they weren't passing by. They were waiting, looking at the building like it might open its mouth and speak. A little girl held her father's hand tightly. Eyes wide with wonder, a young man leaned against his bicycle, earbuds pulled out, listening for something. An elderly woman clutched a blanket and hummed quietly to herself. The same tune Elena had played the night before. Elena hesitated, her heart racing. She hadn't expected this. One of the men stepped forward and asked politely, "Was it you last night?" She looked at him, unsure, then nodded slowly. The group didn't cheer or rush her, they just smiled, soft, respectful, as if they already knew the music wasn't about fame or attention. Elena unlocked the creaky door and pushed it open. The cat, now named Note in her mind, darted ahead into the shadows. She set her mother's photo on the top of the piano, letting it watch over the keys. Then she lit the lantern and sat down. Tonight, she would play a different song, one her mother wrote before Elena was born. A piece called "Money Before the Rain." It was soft, moody and full of longing, the kind of song you'd hear in a memory. Her mother used to say she wrote it when she was young and in love. Elena never knew who the song was about, but tonight it didn't matter. It was a gift and she was ready to share it. As she pressed the first key, the room seemed to shiver. The lights above flickered once and then glowed steady and warm. Outside, people leaned in closer, listening. The music poured out slow and rich. Like warm honey, Elena's hands moved with care, feeling the heartbeat in each note. This wasn't a performance, it was a conversation, one between her, the piano, her mother, and the listening city. The melody drifted out into the streets again, climbing balconies, weaving through alleyways, passing sleeping cats and curious children looking through windows. Inside a hospital 3 blocks away, a nurse paused her rounds, holding a cup of coffee halfway to her lips. "It's back," she whispered to a patient sitting near the window. "That piano girl?" The old man in the wheelchair nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. "I used to hear that tune 40 years ago," he said, though he wasn't sure why he remembered it now. At the shelter near the train tracks, someone turned off the TV. "Shh," a woman said. "Listen." The melody was reaching places Elena would never see, touching people she'd never meet, and still, she kept playing. She finished the piece with a soft chord, her fingers pressing gently as if laying a kiss on the piano's skin. The silence afterward was deep, full of weight but not empty. A slow clap began outside, then more followed. Not loud, but meaningful. Elena opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The small crowd looked at her with wide eyes and quiet smiles. One girl, no older than 10, stepped forward and said, "I want to learn to play like you." Elena knelt, heart full. "You will," she said gently. "The music's waiting for you too." A man in a long coat approached her, holding out a card. "My name's Aaron. I'm from the local community center," he said. "We'd love to help you restore this place properly. Maybe even open it up for others." Elena took the card, eyes wide. "Really?" He nodded. "The city's listening again, and I think it's ready to sing too." That night, she stayed long after the others left, cleaning more of the music room. She fixed a broken stool, stacked fallen chairs, and gently wiped dust from a second piano in the corner. Maybe it could play again someday too. As the cat curled beside her and the lantern flickered low, Elena whispered to the photo of her mother. "They came, Mom, they really came. And far above, as if the city itself agreed. A single light on a rooftop flickered on where it hadn't worked in years. A quiet yes in the language of buildings and broken things. The next few days were unlike anything Elena had ever known. What started as a lonely, secret project had now become a quiet movement. Word had spread faster than she expected, not through newspapers or big headlines, but through whispers, shared videos, and stories told in hushed voices. Each evening, more people came, not in loud crowds, but in small groups, families, loners, elders who remembered the old music school, children who had never seen a real piano before. They came with blankets, thermoses, folding chairs, and open hearts Elena never asked them to. She simply showed up every night at the same time, lantern in one hand, her mother's sheet music in the other, and each night, she played a different melody, songs her mother had written, tunes Elena had grown up hearing but never truly understood until now. The room itself had started to change. The broken walls didn't seem so gray anymore. The echo didn't feel hollow. It felt like a heartbeat. Steady and warm one night, someone left a bouquet of fresh flowers near the piano. Another night, a small box of new strings sat on the bench with a note that read, "For the music." Elena always kept her mother's photo near the keys, smiling back at the crowd like a quiet guardian. Then came the night that changed everything. It was colder than usual, and Elena almost stayed home. Her fingers had small cuts from tuning the piano that morning, and her chest ached from lack of sleep. But something pulled her out of bed, something louder than pain. Purpose. She reached the conservatory to find a surprise. The entire front steps were lit with tiny LED candles gently flickering in the dark. People stood silently, holding warm drinks, their faces calm but expectant. Aaron from the community center was there too, beside a woman with gray hair and a clipboard. "We brought someone tonight," he told Elena. "Someone who used to teach here." Before the fire, Elena blinked in surprise as the woman stepped forward slowly, cane tapping against the old stone. "You must be the girl who brought the music back," she said gently. "I'm Miss Corelli. I taught piano here for 40 years." Elena didn't know what to say. She felt suddenly small, like a student again. But Miss Corelli only smiled and took her hand. "I'd be honored to hear you play." That night, Elena didn't play one of her mother's old songs. She played one of her own for the first time ever, a tune she had written in pieces over the last few weeks, something that carried every tear, every memory, every broken thing turned beautiful again. It started slow with hesitant notes, then grew braver, bolder. The melody danced, paused, whispered, and finally rose like sunlight after a long storm. People listened with their eyes closed, letting the music carry them. No one coughed, no one checked their phones. They were still, utterly still, like the city itself had stopped to breathe. Miss Corelli wiped her eyes quietly as the final notes fell like feathers into silence. Elena looked up, unsure. But then something incredible happened. Miss Corelli stepped forward and sat beside her on the bench. Her hands, aged but steady, hovered above the keys. "May I?" she asked. Elena nodded, unable to speak, and then 2 generations of music flowed together. Elena's melody woven with Miss Corelli's. The notes rose like a duet between past and present, sorrow and joy, silence and song. When they finished, the room erupted, not with loud cheers but with something deeper. People stood in silence, hands on hearts, some wiping tears afterward as people slowly left. Many came to Elena to thank her, not for a concert, but for reminding them that beauty could grow from ashes, that even broken places could sing again. Aaron pulled her aside and said softly, "The city wants to help fix this place, grants, volunteers, everything." Elena felt the world spinning gently beneath her feet. "Why now?" she asked. He smiled. "Because you reminded them why it matters." As she packed her things that night, she looked around the room and didn't see a ruin anymore. She saw a stage, a school, a dream still beating. She whispered to her mother's photo, "You didn't just teach me how to play. You taught me how to listen." The piano creaked softly, almost like it agreed. And outside, the city lights glowed a little brighter, as if every window was watching, waiting, listening for what would come next. The sky was clear the next night, a deep velvet blue scattered with stars. As Elena walked toward the conservatory, something felt different, not just in the air, but inside her for the first time in a long time. Her steps weren't heavy. She wasn't going there to grieve anymore. She was going to celebrate. The city had officially announced a plan to restore the old conservatory. After the videos went viral and the stories spread, local artists, volunteers, and even architects had come forward, offering help. It would take time, but the broken walls would stand tall again, and the music school would live, not as a museum, but as a place for anyone who had a song inside them. When Elena reached the building, she stopped at the steps. Something shimmered across the stone. Dozens of people stood holding candles, their faces lit by soft golden light. Not shouting, not filming, just smiling. Waiting for her, Miss Corelli waved from the front row. Beside Aaron and a group of school children holding sketchbooks and violins, someone had set up folding chairs in neat rows. And there, in the center of it all, stood the piano, polished, mended, glowing under strings of fairy lights someone had wrapped across the cracked ceiling beams. A banner hung behind it. "One note can wake a city." Elena stepped forward slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She was still just a girl who fixed things in the dark. But now she was also the girl who brought them back to life. She sat on the bench, now covered with a hand-sewn cushion embroidered with musical notes. She took a deep breath and pressed her fingers to the keys. But before she played, she looked up at the crowd and spoke. Her voice was soft, but the silence made it ring clear. "I didn't think anyone would care," she said. "This piano was the only thing I had left of my mother. I came here to fix it. But it fixed me instead." People listened, still and reverent. "We all carry broken pieces," she continued. "Sometimes it just takes one note, one sound, one small song to remind us we're not alone." Then she turned to the keys and began to play. This was her final gift to the piano, to her mother, to the city, an original song she'd finished just the night before. It had no title yet, because it wasn't meant to be claimed. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt forgotten, everyone who had ever wanted to feel whole again. The melody began with a single note soft like a breath. Then came the build, a story without words, told through keys that wept and danced and rose like a phoenix. In the crowd, a man held his wife's hand tighter, remembering the song they used to dance to as teens. A teenage boy filmed with shaky hands, eyes full of awe. A little girl on her father's shoulders hummed along, not knowing the tune but feeling it all the same. The piano sang, but this time it didn't feel lonely. It felt like a choir of memories, of love stitched together by time. As the final chord faded, no one clapped right away, no one needed to. The silence that followed was louder than any cheer. It held every emotion, every tear, every heart that had been touched. Then someone in the back whispered, "Thank you," and more followed. A soft wave of gratitude, a standing ovation not of noise, but of presence. Miss Corelli stepped up again. Tears in her eyes, she placed a hand on Elena's shoulder and said, "You brought this place back to life, child, and gave us all something we didn't know we needed." Aaron came forward with a small velvet box. "From the community," he said. Inside was a tiny golden pendant shaped like a piano key, engraved with the words "Played by Heart." Elena smiled. Holding it close, "I didn't do it alone," she said. The music was already here, it just needed someone to listen. The people stayed long after the music ended, sharing stories, hugging, placing letters and flowers at the base of the piano. Some signed up for music classes that hadn't even begun yet. Others simply sat quietly, as if hoping the walls would hum again. As midnight neared, the candles were gently blown out, and the crowd slowly drifted home. Elena stayed behind, sitting at the bench with the cat curled in her lap. She looked up through the shattered glass ceiling, where stars blinked like a silent applause. Her mother's photo still stood on the piano. Smiling, proud, Elena whispered, "You can rest now, Mom." Then she smiled, because now the whole city was wide awake and listening.